That light. Should have wore some toner up here. Good. Good. Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing? Come on, we can do better. How's everybody doing? All right. Welcome. We are live on Facebook. So from the 50 Million Strong Forum here in Boston. So for folks that got canceled or the snow didn't allow them to travel or folks that just weren't coming to Boston, they get to watch and partake of this with us. My name is Jamie Sparks. I'm with the Department of Education in Kentucky, but last year in 2016, I also served as our state president for our state association. So we're still an APERD association, so CAPERD, and so that's kind of, I had a dual role last year. So one of the things that we did last summer is we hosted a series of professional developments, and we actually used the theme 50 Million Strong in those PDs. And so really what it was, and so I think when I was in Seattle and I heard 50 Million Strong rolled out, I'm a big picture, live in the clouds kind of guy. So for me, I was like, yeah, and just hugged it up. And other people were like, what does that mean? What do we need to do? What program do we implement? And so for me, it's really played into a lot of other things that we were doing in the state. And so with ESSA, with the Every Student Succeeds Act coming down the pipe, and just that vision of saying health and physical education, it matters. And so for us, it was a way to take that concept of health literacy and physical literacy and say, here are the outcomes that we need to expect. So there's been a lot of moving parts in our state. So one of the big things that was moving was teacher effectiveness and teacher evaluation. And so a long time in our profession, we'd have, oh, well, we got too many kids, or I teach 300 kids a day and I can't do assessment. But at the end of the day, if we weren't saying, here's how a student is different from the time they enter my class in September and leave in May, that's not teaching. And so as a profession and as a state association, we were saying, we have to raise our bar. We have to raise our bar, and that includes having professional accountability. And so the old days of having coach come along and roll out the ball and that concept, we have to hold each other accountable, and we have to up that bar to administrators. And so for us, 50 Million Strong was a philosophy, a vision that we were able to theme on our professional developments. And so one of the things that we had, and we had teacher PDs, but we also had district leader professional development as well. So we had administrators and principals and folks like that. So the very first question we would ask them is, in your school district, and I want everybody to think about this, in your school district, when students leave the 12th grade, they enter in preschool and exit in 12th grade, what is their level of physical literacy when they exit 12th grade in your school district? Is it low? Is it medium? Or are we saying kids are truly physically literate and or health literate? And so we would have that as a discussion. And so folks would talk about, well, and so then the next part of that question is, why? Because, right, I didn't have a lot of people saying, kids are leaving at this level, right? They have skills to be healthy for a lifetime. And so a lot of folks were saying here, and then when we really dug into the question, they were really saying, well, it's probably here. Because what we see in all 50 states is even though we may have state policy or state requirements, we don't see implementation. And we see lack of funding, and we see lack of measures and accountability systems. And so those are the things we started talking about with barriers. So we started talking about those challenges of how do we change that? How do we say that health education and physical education are just like math and science and reading? And so in our state, the conversation the past year as a result of ESSA and as a result of this philosophy is really beginning to change and take shape. Because for the past 5 years, we focused on college and career readiness. Right? You heard that term, right? And so the ironic thing is when college and career readiness, that term kind of rolled out, nobody even knew what it was. They didn't. I started the Department of Ed in 2010, and we were saying, college career ready. What's that mean? We don't know. We just knew that's the direction we needed to go with what we were measuring. And so 50 Million Strong is a lot of that. It's a philosophy of saying by 2029, if health and PE are subjects like math, and like science, and like reading, the next question is, how do your students look different? Right? If we can say they're leaving 12th grade in our school district and they are physically literate and they are health literate, what's that mean for your community? What's that mean for your state? And what does that mean for our country? And to me, that was the essence of 50 Million Strong by 2029. If we can collectively move that bar to raise that bar of expectation and accountability and funding, ESSA has started that ball rolling. It's not foolproof. Because literally what's happening right now is 50 states are going to have 50 different plans. And as we look at that and have conversations the next few days, my fear in ESSA with our vision of 50 million strong is there are going to be some states that are going to move way past where we were in No Child Left Behind. My fear is there are going to be other states that are going to be farther left behind than they were in NCLB. Because if we're not tracking the right measures, if we've not elevated that. And SHAPE just recently back in the fall put out the Ed Week. It was a tweet that went, and I see a lot of people sharing that. When they ask administrators, how are you going to use ESSA funding, Title II and Title IV? Health and PE was at the bottom of about 15 or 20 different things. So we, as the professionals, as leaders in this organization, we have to think about what 50 million strong means to us. How do we impact local advocacy? How do we impact state advocacy? And how do we continue to impact that federal advocacy? And so that's kind of where we want to get our wheels thinking about raising that bar. And the one thing I haven't said that I think is critically important right now in our society and culture is how with 50 million strong do we impact healthcare? Because in Kentucky, we were doing a lot of things with Medicaid expansion that's now starting to change, and we don't know where that's going to go, right? That's a relevant conversation right now. What's going to happen with healthcare? I believe we are the biggest influencers in healthcare in this country. And we have to say that message, and 50 million strong gives us a way to say that. Because what we're always talking about in government is how do we fix it later on? After it's broke, after it's a problem, how are we going to get enough money for this or that? Instead of saying, wait a minute. What if we, as health and PE teachers, what if we're at the table, what if we invest in that in kindergarten? And we invest in that through the 12th grade? Then what does healthcare look like? I would love to have that argument with anybody that we're going to improve healthcare outcomes drastically if we're doing what we know we can do, what we're capable of. So within our groups, I think that's Aaron's going to be taking some additional notes, and we just wanted to spur your thinking about what that vision is, about the importance of health literacy, the importance of physical literacy, and how can we continue to engage in that conversation with policymakers, with decision makers, with school boards associations, with school administrators, and really continue to collectively move that. We're doing a really good job, but it takes more of us. It takes more. I know in Kentucky, we've done a really good job with advocacy, but there's a handful of us doing it. And it really means something that we all collectively have to own. We have to be a part of that vision and a part of that voice. So thoughts or questions from you guys as we kind of start. And I think we're going to go back into smaller groups for some better discussion. Are you the only note taker?
Each circle should have a note taker.
Yes.
Like myself, and we should have probably at least 2 circles that can.
Are you a note taker? Or are you just taking your own? You are? Okay.
Note taker.
Note taker.
Perfect.
Awesome. Any questions or thoughts before we go into some smaller circles and have some conversations with you guys? Awesome. All right. So we have 3 note takers. So let's subdivide up into some smaller circles. You guys are already kind of over here. Maybe some of you want to get in a smaller one over here. And we'll just continue to have some discussion through our note takers about this concept of raising our bar, professional accountability. Yes.
On what needs to be done, and to disseminate that information to other people, and to have them understand it and grasp it fully. We need to give them a full day of education on what's what. How Title I is affected, how Title II is affected, how Title IV, Part A is affecting all of us, and what we can do with it that's now open to us. But there are a lot of people that aren't interested in it. They don't want to jump in and embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
Be a part of it. They want you to do the heavy lifting.
Yep. Yep. And you know, again, ESSA is a great example. It has to happen at all levels because it is a. He talked about a seismic shift. It's a huge paradigm shift in what this looks like. And we were having that conversation this morning because it's hard to get teachers and principals out of that mindset of test scores. And ESSA is helping to change that philosophy of you know, that's the conversation we're having in our state. How do we give schools credit in the accountability for doing the right thing, for offering things? And so it's not necessarily about getting to a level of proficiency, but it's really about the student health, the whole child, and things like that. Now, there's a lot of other variables within those plans. Yeah.
It's stakeholders that are not here that need to hear all
Mm-hmm.
this. We have the passion.
Yep.
We have the voice. Yes, I understand we have partnerships with lots of different entities.
Yep.
However, until they fully buy into what we are as physical educators and health educators, where do we stand?
Yep. Yep.
That's
And I think it was great what y'all did in Kentucky because you knew where they were going to be, your legislators. Not all states have that, and y'all were there, and you're like, oh, well, they're the physical education people. If we could start that in all states, or if we knew, or if our state legislators cared enough
Yeah.
to be able to do that and say, yeah, we're going to come here, we're going to come here, and then having those small little pockets.
it's that sharing component within each state
Yeah.
that are willing to step up to the plate
Yep.
and say, this is our criteria, and this is a model, and this works. Some states are being left behind.
Yeah, and you're right. It's finding that right person to be that voice because we can say it all we want, and people are going to look at us and say, well, of course you're the health and PE folks, and so that leverage is really important because, and that's what we've been able to do. 2 years ago, CDC was funding. So I've been a part of a CDC grant since 2010. CDC was funding the National Associations of State Boards of Ed. They were funding the National Associations of School Boards Association, of American School Administrators. So we were working with them with Let's Move Active Schools. So all the work that we were doing, I wasn't saying it. I was partnering with our state association to say, here's what your national association says. And so we've got to learn to work more strategically with those groups and getting that buy-in.
One thing we've done in Louisiana for the past 3 years, we have an exhibit booth at the state superintendents and state principals meetings, and we're giving them information as to what appropriate physical education is, what is quality physical education, and they all say to us, "Wish we'd have had this before. We've never seen this. We know now how to evaluate a physical education teacher. And we're going to continue to do it
Yep.
because we've tried the legislators.
They just send their aides to pick up the
This
packet.
gets you get right to who's going to
Yep.
ask for the money."
Well, and we're a victim of our own demise too, because how many of those legislators, how many of those principals we're trying to convince of these things now have come through a crappy PE program. And so when we're saying more of this, they're like, well, anybody can do that. And so we really, conceptually, I think that's the reason that the concept around physical literacy and those outcomes, what those measures are, standards assessment, and really having that validity to say, we're a legitimate content area, and just well-rounded puts us on that playing field for funding, but there's still a lot of folks that aren't going to do that because of, and so again, getting to those shifts, and so it's not a light switch.
It's still back to that partnership in between
Yep.
your state association, your Department of Education, plus all those other outside entities. So you got to have that buy-in.
Yep.
So how do you marry them all together?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. When you look at systems change, it takes time for systems change. But with ESSA, like it's here now. Like it's the we've got to get those things in place. Yeah.
Yeah, we all know
Yep.
about ESSA. We know exactly what our rights are and how to advocate for those. But until the superintendents understand, yes, we do know. How do you sell it to them?
Yeah. Yep.
That's the component that we need to have as a tool to go back and fight for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not fight for.
Yeah. And so far, we've been putting a lot of focus and efforts into, again, it's kind of timing. So the new federal wellness policy requirements are now finalized. So we've been putting a lot of focus in our work moving forward with those because we're like, here's an area that's already federally required, and now it has new requirements. And so as we move forward with this new thinking, here's a place to invest, and that's where the data and the assessments are really helping to move that forward. Yeah, and it's kind of, and to pair those together. And so because the new federal wellness policy requirement requires every 3 years a measure of implementation. And so ESSA requires needs assessment. So that's where the data from Alliance for Healthier Generation, School Health Index, and having that data in place and have that's our approach. It's 2 for 1. Here's what you need to do for federal. We know you got to do that every 3 years, but with ESSA, you got to do this assessment, use this data to where it goes together. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and now the drawback to that is it's just physical activity and nutrition. But we're just starting the process. So hey, if that's some low-hanging fruit that we have right now, then we'll start there.
Through the Alliance for a Healthy Regeneration, they do have the whole school wellness.
Yes.
So you can start out small with the physical education, physical activity, nutrition, and then broaden your horizon and get the whole school involved.
Yeah.
Which would probably mean wellness policies.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, the philosophy around the whole school, whole community, whole child model, the new evolution of the coordinated school health model, that kind of puts all the players, shareholders, and how to bring them in the community and the impact of that. So it is a framework in which we all should be able to work from. And again, it's not always very prescriptive in every school district, but at least it's that philosophy of bringing that wider community into what we're doing within that. Yeah.
Another thing, we have to make ourselves known to the State Department that saying, yeah, we can help.
Mm-hmm.
We can help you with this. We know what is in there. We can help you. So that's what we did. We kind of had a meeting last week, and we feel that we've made some good
Yeah.
progress.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
we
For
have
sure.
a senator that is very much on our side, but it took kind of talking with him through the years and knowing where he goes for breakfast, having some of our
What he eats for breakfast?
but having some of our key people in person know, periodically going in and saying, Senator Ketron, hey, how's it going? And he is a huge advocate for us right now. That we've got the Tom Cronin physical activity bill, and we had Joan Cronin go and speak before the body. So hopefully, that'll work. But it's starting off with those relationships and building. We're still far behind, but
I'm trying to, I don't know if we're still live or not. Are we live? Are we good? All right. I was like,